This movie made me so glad I didn't go to college, which is kind of ironic because the free screening that I went to was sponsored by a college, but at the same time, the professors there who gave an introduction and a Q&A after the movie are from this program called the Heterodox Academy, which is advocating for diversity of thought, open inquiry, and as they put it, constructive disagreements on campus. And it's really nice to see college professors that aren't politically motivated and actually want to prepare kids for the real world by explaining how the real world works as opposed to how the world should work according to them. But that was also one of the reasons I was scared shitless to see Coddling of the American Mind in the first place. Not because of the movie itself and the subject matter. All those things I knew I could stomach just fine. But I was also extremely worried that there was going to be some student protest in the middle of the movie where they would scream over everything and just shout endlessly about how toxic or whatever bullshit excuse they have for being triggered by the movie. But the good news is the only annoying people in the theater were some old ladies nagging me about my seat just because they wanted to sit there. But regardless, The Coddling of the American Mind is based off of a book that chronicles the lives of 5 Gen Z kids and how in their college years, social media, identity politics, and cancel culture contributed severely to their mental health, leading to depression, anxiety, ideation, amongst other things, and how the 3 factors that I just mentioned have made young adults such as myself considerably fragile and obsessed with political ideology. But there's also an optimistic side of it where the co-authors of the book describe cognitive behavioral therapy and the techniques used to make coping mechanisms and to recognize the 3 untruths, as they call it. 1 is that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. 2, always trust your feelings. And 3, life is a never-ending battle between good people and evil people. Now let me make something clear. This movie does not take a side in regards to right-wing or left-wing politics. None of the kids in this discuss their political parties or allegiances. If anything, these subjects are as diverse as a DEI protocol would actually want the world to be, because you have white, black, American, African, Indian, Christian, Jewish, Islam. The list goes on. And without even trying, this movie actually shows how people of different cultures have different values, but at the same time can experience the exact same individual hardships and actually find common ground with each other. There are extensive clips in this movie that show how the left and right engage in cancel culture for completely different reasons. If you're on the left, you're canceled for allegedly being a bigot to a marginalized group. If you're on the right, you're canceled for being unpatriotic or just a traitor to your own country. In some of the countries these kids come from, conservatives are the ones who censor freedom of speech. In others, it's the liberals who do it. And no matter where they are, they hate fucking both scenarios. They feel completely isolated and withdrawn, going from one country that doesn't understand them to the next. And this part's important. No one in this movie denies the fact that there is discrimination against Black, brown, indigenous, LGBTQ, disabled, elderly people. The list goes on. What they are saying, however, is that believing that microaggressions are an act of bigotry without asking for context, trigger warnings, and safe spaces to shelter you from speech that you don't want to hear, disinviting or unfriending people because they don't share the same values as you do, DEI programs training you what to say even if you don't believe that it's true, having counselors at the door of DEI meetings in case anyone is traumatized. Always makes things worse. And it always makes things worse because it is encouraging you to be weak, to be unwilling to stand up for yourself unless there is someone else to do the standing up for you. Meanwhile, the only way to actually fight discrimination is through freedom of expression, open-mindedness, and forgiveness. The ability to be brave enough to stand up and actually question bigoted ideas so that whenever a real white supremacist or bully can't answer those questions, they're actually defeated. Their ideology becomes absolutely nothing. Let me give you an example. There's this one relative of mine who is maybe my biggest YouTube fan. She watches all of my stuff. She comments remarking what a good job I did. And just for that alone, I love her. But about 14 years ago, before I went into high school, we were on a regular walk, and out of nowhere, I can't remember why, but she said that she didn't think gay people should get married and that she thought being gay was a choice. And naturally, I was pissed off at such a notion. But I didn't scream in her face about why she was wrong. I asked her simple questions about how 2 men or 2 women getting married affected her marriage or anyone's in any way possible, or why anyone would make a choice like that when they get shunned from their friends and family. How would that be a choice? And she couldn't answer any of those questions. And over time, her opinions on those became significantly less, I should say, bigoted. And I'm happy to say that she's not that person anymore, and I forgive her for all that. Our relationship has become a lot stronger just because I was willing to have a conversation that most family members of mine never would with her. That is how you get people to change their perception or their ideas towards the world, by openly disagreeing and asking them the tough questions that they clearly had never thought of before. And I love that there's a documentary out there that actually encourages these things. And also being able to bring people together who openly admit that they believe these things without question, or in some cases disagreed, but because of peer pressure just went along with it anyways. I knew about college campus protests where they would scream over the speakers like 5-year-olds, or block the doors to prevent people from entering like 5-year-olds, or violently lashing out at anyone that wasn't one of them like 5-year-olds. But it was interesting listening to people who used to be regular protesters who were always constantly looking for something to be offended. And listening to them speak and watching these reenactments of their experience, either through still drawings or these really weird, surreal, and kind of horrifying Monty Python type animations, was actually really harrowing. Not because of the actual stories they were talking about. The stories they had where they believed in so many ridiculous things, like how it was going to be the end of the world that you-know-who was president, that they got no sleep over the elections, or that they were constantly scouring through Twitter profiles to find one tweet that would violate the terms of speech and get them deplatformed. It was pathetic, but the fact that they were so committed to these beliefs like a cult, and listening to them speak about it in such a remorseful way, was actually really harrowing. And the worst stories were the ones where they actually were pressured into saying shit that they didn't believe, or speaking up about it and getting canceled for it. There's one autistic girl whose blog I'd actually read a couple times, and when I saw her name in the credits, I couldn't believe it was her, but all of a sudden it just made a hell of a lot more sense. She recalls all these times where her social justice friends just expected her to apologize after the George Floyd death for being white, as if the actions of that police officer were somehow her actions as well because of her skin color. I shouldn't have to point out how disgustingly hypocritical such a statement is, or because she was writing works of fiction that she couldn't write about non-white characters because it wasn't her lived-in experience, but she also couldn't write about white characters because, well, you all know the reason why, so either way, she was completely fucked. It was a double-edged sword. Or this one guy who wrote an email about how condescending and downright belittling DEI training was, which should appease a guy like him, an international student and immigrant from India. All of these terms, among others, should apply to him directly, but he pointed out that these things never make the world better. If anything, they make it more tense and toxic because you're not actually communicating what you want to say. You're being taught what to say to certain people instead of being taught how to express yourself without coming across as a mean-spirited person. And also, the fact that these kids aren't being prepared for the real world because they're too busy being taught this ridiculous notion that a mean tweet and a punch to the face are equally harmful. And all of a sudden, once he sends out that email, everybody labels him a sexist or a homophobe without any evidence for it. Now, even with all the evidence presented in this documentary, there's still going to be people who watch this and just go, well, I didn't see any of this happen on my campus, so clearly it doesn't happen. Hell, one of the speakers at this screening, part of the Heterodox Academy, only agrees with half of the movie and thinks that certain aspects and factoids about this are a little overblown. And when I heard that lady speak about that, it just reminded me of yet another experience that I had, but this time it was right before the pandemic ended, where I was on Letterboxd and a coworker of mine who I thought was my friend gave Nomadland 3 out of 5 stars only because there were real nomads playing themselves. But she downgraded it just because Frances McDormand and Chloe Zhao had no experience, therefore no business making a movie about nomads, which was such a stupid notion to say because Chloe Zhao, her entire name and career are being censored in China just because she spoke out against the government. And Frances McDormand is an adoptee, which means that her life could have turned out significantly different than the one she has now, for better or worse. So I thought it was bullshit, and I politely asked her, don't you think you're reviewing the politics of the movie as opposed to the actual movie? And out of nowhere, this one douchebag started name-calling and teasing me about my opinion. And when I shouldn't have done this in retrospect, but when I called him out for being a bully and for pointing out that I'm simply asking questions, not only did he accuse me of gaslighting, he basically threatened me. And I know in hindsight that he was probably kidding, but when you write to someone, see you tonight, and you're in the exact same city as that guy, it fucks with your head for like a solid day or two. And I shouldn't have checked on the message afterwards, but I saw a bunch of replies about our back and forth. One girl said, "This is a fight between two virgins, I love it." And the girl that I thought was my friend wrote, "Men shake my head." She lumped me, a guy who just simply questioned her opinion, in the same category as someone who jokingly threatened to kill me. You can disagree with me on my political opinions or anyone else in this movies, and I can completely understand, but you can't tell me that this shit isn't real or isn't a significant problem. I have been at so many dinners, so many parties, where it didn't matter if all the friends were left-leaning or right-leaning, but it was so unanimously on that side. And they would always speak about it like everybody was on the same page. And I would just sit there in complete silence, mostly to keep the peace. And the fact that so many of them were my friends and family, and that I kept telling myself that I don't have to agree with them in order to like them. And most of them are still my friends and family. I've cut off so many friendships because they act like the people in this movie that severely need this kind of help the most. It's absolutely pathetic that whenever I say a dissenting opinion, they get a complete scowl on their face and start saying these passive and flippant remarks about how I'm wrong or being completely insensitive towards them or other people. It's embarrassing how many of them are significantly older and, I will admit, much wiser, but when it comes to subjects like that, they don't act like it. Now, the one thing that I don't like about this movie is that, as uplifting as it is that the subjects in this got the help that they needed and have bettered themselves, it isn't really clear to me what the actual solution for this political divide is. For me, the most uplifting scenes in this movie are the co-authors of the book talking about how one of them was actually saved from severe depression and ideation from cognitive behavioral therapy, and how there are techniques that can teach kids coping mechanisms to understand that, for example, microaggressions are not like mosquitoes. They're not a scenario where some people get bit and others don't. What idiot came up with that? Regardless, CBT can teach coping mechanisms to understand that microaggressions are not acts of bigotry. They're just sentences that you don't understand the context to and need to elaborate on a little bit further. There are several kids in this movie that talk about how there are coping mechanisms that did save their life, but we never really get a sense as to what those mechanisms are and how they've helped them. All we know is that there were moments where an entire day can become a bad day just because of one incident. They would spend hours and hours dwelling on it, and now the worst case scenario of their day takes about an hour for them to process and deal with. And it's great to hear that, but I would like to hear how it accomplished that in the first place. And I'm just going to say it, I think therapists are part of the problem when it comes to using microaggressions and trigger warnings as an excuse to be a victim. I have a therapist who thinks that exact kind of mentality. My last session, I was talking about how the job market for the field that I'm trying to get into so badly, which is video editing or trying to make it on my own with this channel and be my own boss. But long story short, she suggested that I try to find jobs through the municipality of my city and use my diagnosis of autism as an equity factor into getting hired. And also tried to justify it by using herself as an example just because she's an older woman and she's matey. And when she said that, I looked up at her, I gave her this extremely judgmental look that said, I'm never coming back here. She clearly didn't pick up on it because she kept talking, but that's not how I want to get hired. I do not want to get hired. I do not want to be seen on the basis of a mental disorder that I have. It's the reason I took down my most popular video, which was a video essay on autism, because that was all people saw me as. And to be honest, I just want to make it through my own merits that I believe I do have, as opposed to just a victimhood status. So it's really hard to say what the overall solution is in regards to stuff like this. I know that me asking questions broke down my one relative, and I have seen people get really stumped on things that they never would have thought of with just a simple question. But there has to be more than one solution, and I don't think just seeking out cognitive behavioral therapy is the only one, especially when, as many people have pointed out, access to mental health care isn't always the easiest, depending on where you live and what resources you do have. But at the same time, I'm really glad that I saw the Coddling of the American Mind. The subject matter was mostly handled in such a nuanced and neutral way. Its intentions were in the right place without relying on those intentions to begin with. And the subjects throughout, I wish nothing but the best of luck. They seem like incredible people. There are two of them that I may, in fact, reach out once this video is out in order to say, congratulations, I love what you're doing. Keep up the good work. And with that, guys, thanks as always for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Coddling of the American Mind. Be sure to check me out on Patreon, buy me a coffee. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more reviews. Take care.